Well, we are in for a treat because we have someone who has so many years of experience when it comes to all things surrogacy and donors and all the things that come with it. Wendie, thank you so much for hopping into Fertility Ain't Fair. How are you?
I'm doing great. And thank you, Brittany, for having me on.
No, the pleasure is really all mine. I told you offline that I'm excited because we have not had a full episode dedicated just for surrogacy. And it is one of those very large topics that I feel like probably doesn't get enough understanding. There's probably a lot of myths and just a lot of things we don't get about it, and we don't ask the right questions, and we don't even know where to start, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. So I'm excited to learn and ask the questions, and I'm sure that somebody else who hears this at any point in time, whether it's during Infertility Awareness Month in June or beyond, will just be better armed with some more information and not feel like this is such a intimidating process, right? Because I feel like that right now. And while I'm not at the place where, we're still in our journey and we're still, trying other options, who knows? You never know where this journey leads you. So it's just good to have more information. So before we get into all things surrogacy in the process, I ask all my guests this one question. So I'm going to ask you as well. How do you define yourself? Like, what are those words or phrases to define who you are as of today, right now?
As of today, right now, well, I'll tell you, I just had my 49th birthday on Saturday. So
We love that for you. Congratulations.
thank you. I made it. I'm still healthy.
And you look amazing. So cheers to that.
So, part of my definition right now is going through perimenopause. I'm, something that every woman goes through at some point in her life. But it's a great question. I was a little unprepared for it, but I'm going to, just try to dig deep and be as honest as I can. But I would say right now, the biggest word to describe me that I never had before, that I lacked when I was younger, is a sense of confidence and capability. I didn't grow up in a situation where, I grew up very religious, and in some religions, women are very much in one space. I know that doesn't apply to all, but they're in one space. And in my particular one, it was to be a wife and a mother and not a business person. And, none of the things that we now certainly don't say to our own daughters. So that confidence and capability took some time. And it's why I'm enjoying the aging process, why I don't mind that looming golden big 5-0 that's next year. It actually, instead, it's empowering.
I love when I catch you guys off guard with the question, because also I feel like it's a better answer every single time. Like, I feel like that was such an amazing answer, and it felt raw and real and just transparent. And so that was done intentionally. I do apologize. However, what a great answer. So, well, thank you for sharing that and giving us a starting place. And you mentioned, being an entrepreneur and being a businesswoman and those things. And so, you are doing all of those things. And as the head and the leader of All Families Surrogacy, I have to first say, how did you become this person? Like, how did you say, you know what? I want to own this business. Out of all the options out there, I mean, we are thankful in our community, right, to have someone like you saying we want to continue, having amazing places for women to go to be surrogates or to look for surrogates. So how did you become the head of the company, first and foremost?
Yeah. So interesting story, as we all have, because not many people knew about this when I first got into it as well. So we'll jump way back to me in my early 20s. And there were probably, I want to say, right before I started in this industry, I want to say there were maybe 10 agencies in the US And we think there are probably close to about 1,000 now, all throughout the US. So it's much, much bigger and much different than when I started. But my first introduction in it was when I was in college. I was going to the University of Washington, and I would see these signs posted all around our campus from intended parents asking specifically for, hey, if you fit this look, this education, this ... would you please call? So while I never called, I do remember that was my first introduction into egg donation and assisted reproduction. So then when I moved to Los Angeles, I was approached yet again in a Starbucks, no less, asking about being a donor again. And at that point, I decided I very much would look into it. I was curious. I knew I didn't want kids for a while. It had come back into my life. I'd seen it before, registered it, thought about it, tucked it away, and then it came back again. So as with anything, it felt like the path to follow. So I ended up, from that little thread, I ended up being an egg donor for a woman who was a cancer survivor. She had gotten it very young. The treatments, of course, destroyed her ability to have her own biological child. I look like her. I could have been her sister. We ended up meeting back at a time where meeting your intended parents wasn't that common, but it was just our personalities. And I just remember thinking in my young 20s, everything up until that moment is so about you. You're so in your own mind, and first at school and then it's college, and you're just trying to carve your way out in this world. And this was my first opportunity to really look outside myself and see something from someone else's perspective. And then I could help them, right? Like in a what seemed like a huge way. I could be your egg donor. I mean, that seemed like a big deal. So I did it. I loved it. I didn't, back then the protocols were a little different, a little rougher than they are now. Little hyperstimulation, all of those type of things. But overall, the experience to me for this family so outweighed any of the discomfort. So I went on to be a donor 3 more times.
Wow.
So I just, with that experience, the woman that owned it, there was an agency called the Egg Donor Program. It was sold and became Hatch, which is a fairly large PE-owned company in the U.S. right now. And the owner of it at that time, Shelley Smith, had been looking for someone else to start, I think initially a marketing campaign. And I had a little bit of that background. So I said, oh, I can do that. And so I just worked my way up in that company, and then became vice president of the Egg Donor Program. And then after about 8.5 years, decided I wanted to veer off and go out on my own. So I started Gifted Journeys in Los Angeles. And then in 2020, I purchased All Families Surrogacy from my dear friend, Carrie Flamer Powell, who did a phenomenal job. She had created, I want to say it was the 2nd or 3rd largest agency in Oregon. And so then I just merged our 2 companies together at that point. And we decided to keep the name All Families Surrogacy for the agency. And with Gifted Journeys, we're in the process of potentially making it an association.
That's a wild journey. I mean, I'm sure not super common, right? So
No.
it's clearly a purpose, and it was a passion, and it was, brought to you, like you said, multiple different times throughout your life at different points. And so it was like, I'll wait and see. Then I feel I want to, have action attached to it. And now you own this amazing company. So what I also love, I saw on your website, was that a lot of your staff have been surrogates.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was amazing. And I'm not sure how common it is. I haven't looked up all of 1,000 options, but, I'm not sure how common it is to have a staff, with women who are, prior surrogates. So let's dive into what that looks like. So if someone's like, okay, I've either saw some signs maybe in my life, right? or, I know somebody, or I just have that inherent, want to help, to give life to someone else. Like, what does that look like for somebody who just says, hey, I know I can do this. I want to use my body for good. Where do they start with that?
Yeah. First of all, start by calling us. No.
Well, yes, we're here for that purpose too.
Okay, that's a great question. So the very first thing for anybody who has a desire to be a surrogate is to know that you have to have given birth before. Okay, so unlike being an egg donor, that is not a requirement. Okay, but for a surrogate it is, and it's because we need to know that pregnancy is safe for you. We need to know this is we need to know it. The intended parents need to know it. The doctors need to know it. So that's just the biggest requirement, 0 exceptions as far as that goes. Most agencies go off of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine's guidelines for who qualifies as a surrogate. What's important for surrogates to understand when they come in, however, is that the ASRM guidelines might not match up with the intended parents that choose them as guidelines. And so we start with just a baseline that we have, and then we work on matching surrogates with the appropriate intended parents where those guidelines are accepted at that particular clinic. Okay, so the main ones to just keep in mind is, I believe the ASRM's age is 21 to 44, so long as the embryo transfer happens prior to 44. There are a lot of clinics in the United States that prefer around 35 to 37 as the maximum age. So it's, like I said, it's a guideline created by a board of physicians, but it doesn't necessarily mean exact. So 21 to 44 is the ASRM. A BMI, and that's your body mass index. The vast majority of clinics say 32. I believe the ASRM guideline is 34 or below, but I've seen doctors that require under 30. So you have your previous pregnancy, your age, your BMI, and those are the 3 big ones that most agencies look at before we take you to that next level of qualification. So next level of qualification will be stability in your life. So somebody that's going through a divorce, for example, we would want you to wait until you're through that, because that's a big emotional time in somebody's life. If somebody's in the middle of a move, for example, or in the middle of a job, swapping a job out, then we're typically just waiting for them to be in a place where there's more stability. We have no issues with single moms applying, but we have to have single moms who have a support system to be able to help them out during this process. Because for example, if a surrogate has to go on bed rest and she doesn't have somebody who can help her out, and obviously she has children of her own, and especially if she has young children, then we have to know that she has a support system that can come in there and help her out. All surrogates go through psychological evaluations with mental health professionals who specifically work in our industry. So they work with surrogates, and they know the questions to ask. They know the red flags in somebody's life. And so they do have to have a psychological evaluation, and that evaluation for surrogates is a pass and fail. And I say it specifically that way because it's not the same with intended parents. Intended parents, it's a psychoeducation, whereas with the surrogate, it is a pass or fail. Okay. And then the final thing I'll say 2 more final things. Background checks are always done on a surrogate. And if she has a live-in partner or spouse, then they would need to have a background check as well. And then ideally, almost every clinic now, I won't say all without fail, but almost every clinic is requiring a current pap smear. So something within the last year. And the reason for that is because we don't want to jump through all these hoops to get them to the point where they're going to the clinic that the intended parents are with, and then have testing done there for something that we obviously could have caught in a pap smear that might disqualify them. So, a a physical and pap is ideal. And I would say probably 90 to 95% of the clinics require that now.
And I guess to be a surrogate, I mean, do you have to be in the same locality as the actual clinic who you're working with? Do you all work with like remote surrogates, for
Yeah.
example? That's like a remote job, right? But seriously, like, do you have to be in Oregon, for example, to work with AFS, or can you be anywhere in the country?
You can be anywhere in the country, and most agencies work with about, I would say, on average, anywhere from 5 to maybe 20 clinics. So depending on how big the agency is, how wide their reach is. So we work not only all over the country, but what determines where a surrogate is going to have her embryo transfer and the doctor she works with is the intended parents she's a good match for.
Okay.
So she could be, in Minnesota, but the intended parents might be with a California clinic. So it really just depends on the intended parents. And one of the things I say to intended parents now, when you have an industry with nearly 1,000 players in, the surrogacy market, and we're all looking for the same type of women, healthy women, who are excited to do a surrogacy and who are going to be passed through all the different testing and screening. And we're all seeking the same people.
Right.
That I say it's more important to find the right surrogate and less important where she lives.
Makes sense. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then is there ever a point in a surrogate's, I guess, lifespan or surrogacy lifespan where you're like, okay, we can't have you do any more transfers? Or, is there a point when, a surrogate can no longer, even if they have the best desire to keep going, where you guys say, I think we're going to cut you off, for lack of better words? Is that a part of the process, or can they, until a certain age and they're healthy, are they able to continue to, have more and more options for transfers?
So it's a little bit of a loaded question. So I'll start with the black and white one is you're really not supposed to have had given birth more than 6 times. Okay. So the ASRM guideline on that is 6 pregnancies to completion, and then you hang up, your surrogacy shoes. So that's the first answer to it. There are scenarios in which there will be embryo transfers that aren't successful. Okay. Now, this is where the question gets a little bit difficult. In some cases, it is clearly the quality of the embryos that is the problem. Okay, like that's, from a medical perspective. Other times, everything looks good. The embryo, the lining, previous pregnancies, everything looks great. But for some reason, she's had 2 or 3 transfers with the intended parents and she's not getting pregnant. Now, it's harder for her to find a match after this. If there's no clear explanation on why it didn't work, it is a bigger sell to another intended parent to use this surrogate. So not only would another intended parent's doctor have to say, yes, she's fine, it was probably just incompatible with these embryos, we'll try with her again. So we have to get a doctor to say that, and then we have to get intended parents on board with trying with this surrogate. So it's not impossible. It doesn't mean no, but if it were to happen, say, a second time, so we do match her again, and there's more good quality embryos and she still isn't getting pregnant, then at that point she would have to stop her journey because it would be too difficult and risky for anyone else to move forward.
Yeah, no, thank you for answering that question. And I could probably rabbit hole a million other things on this side of the journey, but that's why if someone needs you, they can reach out to you guys. But on the other side, so flipping over to intended parents and those who are looking for surrogates, I guess tell us about what the process looks like from your agency And I think it's also important maybe just to kind of call out like what are like one of the biggest either misconceptions or maybe just misunderstood things about those who are looking for a surrogate.
Yeah. The biggest misconception right now, or I'll say two, one is timing. So most people, when they get to the point where they realize this is probably my only option, and so then they move forward to the next part of interviewing agencies. And intended parents are realizing very quickly right now that the wait times to be matched with a surrogate are significantly longer than they've ever been in the past. And it's very, very unlikely that that will get better. Okay, so COVID definitely caused a backlog, I guess, for lack of a better word, because there was about a year and a half where understandably not a lot of people were applying to be surrogates. So all of us, especially agencies who've been around that are established, who are well known, we're continuing to get intended parents. In fact, I would say from a certain point of view, like we might have even gotten more for a while because people were home and had time. So, so my list is growing with intended parents, but it's shortening with surrogates. So that was kind of the first thing. And then, of course, anytime there's anything major, I mean, none of us had experienced this situation before, obviously, globally, but anytime there's something like this, private equity also has a tendency to kind of jump in and I don't know if I want to say take advantage or just take it. Well, I mean, it's equity, right? They're taking advantage of a situation. And then that, of course, thins the market out even more because more competition, more people putting money in. So pre-COVID, we went from seeing agencies matching in like 2 to 4 months to all of a sudden it's 6 months to 8 months to 12 months. And right now, I would say most agencies, certainly all of the ones with longevity and established, you're looking at somewhere between 8 months to 18 months is what we're seeing right now. And I don't really see that changing. You can get some newer pop-up agencies that are matching faster, but that's going to change for them fairly quickly as well because there's so many intended parents. It's not just the US either. It's from all over the world. So that was one of the big misconceptions is that you finally make this choice. You finally figure out, okay, I'm going to work this through with my budget. I'm going to find an agency that I like, only to find out that you're probably going to be waiting another year to a year and a half before you get started with the process. So I always tell people, take a deep breath, a lot of patience. Kids take a lot of patience, so it's a good practice, going in. Although most people that come to me have already been through way too much, right? Too much patience. The other thing is anytime someone enters into this process, and it's very expensive. We can talk to cost a little bit as well. Is that people want to guarantee when they enter this, like, okay, we're making this big decision. We're going to use a surrogate. She's not going to have the issues that I've had. It's going to work the first time. And sometimes it does, certainly, but there's no guarantee on that. So you're still going in with that unknown and that leap of faith. So it's the understanding that it's certainly such an amazing journey to have with someone and to create a family, but it doesn't happen quickly, and there is no guarantee it's going to happen the first time. And there's no guarantee because so many different factors are involved, right? Like starting at the very least with the quality of the embryos.
So let me go there for a second. So I know, if you're an IVF, for example, right, there are certain clinics who will have kind of like a shared risk program, or they'll say, hey, you pay the top tier, but we'll give you X amount of retrievals, unlimited or X amount of transfers, and at the end of the day, either you have a child, a live child, or you decide to, move past this and walk away from the IVF process, and, we'll give you whatever their money back. I hate saying it like it's a shirt, but you know what I mean, the
Right.
policy for that. So in surrogacy world, how does that work? Because of course there is never a guarantee, but is there, I don't know, do you get anything back typically
Yeah.
when
This is
if
where,
it doesn't work, right? If it doesn't happen for you and you've had enough and you're like, hey, we're done, we're gonna, either live child free or, one child less, whatever the case may be is, but is there some kind of, I guess, compensation back scenario in, I guess, typical agency world?
got it. Yes. And I'll try to explain from what you're going to see at the vast majority of agencies, and then I'll be specific to ours. Teeny tiny little soapbox, just because I think it would be helpful for your listeners, is a lot of the guarantee programs that clinics do. And it's important to go in with this knowledge because everything about a clinic is going to be for their stats, right? Their stats, and that elevates them. They can report differently to SART, all of these different things. So oftentimes the guarantee programs are only going to be for qualified individuals, or qualified couples, one or the other. And that means the embryos have to be at a certain quality. And so if someone's intention is to use their own genetics and their embryos don't match that quality, they're probably not going to be able to be a part of the guarantee program. That's not straight across the board, but that's more common than not. So the guarantee programs are almost always available for people who are using donor egg, donor sperm, and high quality embryos. Okay, so just something to keep in mind when you're doing your research on that, because anything that sounds a little too good to be true.
Usually we know the
rest. So that being said, so the way that I would say the vast majority of agencies work, and I can't speak for everyone, there are certainly a lot of them, so I'm going to speak for the majority, is when you sign on with an agency, you usually sign on with an agency fee. So most agencies will say, okay, if you choose us, then a portion of your agency fee gets put in, and then you go on our list, and then that's when we start working for you. Okay, creating your profiles, starting introducing you to the teams, that type of thing. Okay, since most agencies need those initial deposits to be able to afford marketing, especially in such a just very aggressive, there's so saturated market. That's probably a better word for it. Very saturated. So the vast majority are going to do that. So you're going to have a deposit. Usually that's non-refundable. So I always say if somebody's asking for the full fee up front, I usually look at that as a red flag. A deposit just to get on someone's list and to start working, that would be your more normal, what you'd want to look for. Okay. That's part one. Second is most agencies aren't going to charge any other fee until you've matched with your surrogate. So this means that she's passed all of the standard screenings that would be expected, the ASRM and the SEEDS screening, which I can talk to later if you need me to. And they've decided to move forward, and the clinic that the intended parents are working with have pre-approved her. Okay, so once all of that has happened, that's typically when the next installment is going to be. And some agencies at that point will collect everything. Others will, again, it will be another portion of the agency fee and a deposit into escrow for the costs that the surrogate is going to start incurring. Okay. So something to keep in mind is if it doesn't work out with that particular surrogate, some agencies, I would say most, charge a rematch fee. A rematch fee to be matched with a new surrogate could be as low as $2,000. It could be as high as an entire other agency fee. So those are things that need to be asked very early on, because rematches right now are at an all-time high. We aren't 100% sure why. We're doing a little internal research with our ethics organization, but we are seeing this happen more often than we've ever seen it before. So our particular agency does not ever charge a rematch fee. So if you need to have a surrogate replaced for any reason, whether it's medical, whether it's just personality, whether something comes up with her or something like that, we will rematch at no charge. So there are probably maybe 10% or less of agencies that do that. So it is something to keep in mind. Okay, so just something to ask when somebody's interviewing agencies. Most clinics will also have their favorite agencies on their list. So that's always a place that most intended parents start. But these are good questions that they can have going in. Okay.
No, thank you. Yeah, for that.
The last thing I think that's really important to know about the process is almost all of the legal contracts are going to be written the same way. So the way legal contracts are broken down are a surrogate. So there's her base compensation. So base compensation is what the contractual agreed upon amount is starting at the time of confirmation of a viable pregnancy. Okay, so this is like, that's when her pain and suffering starts. So that's her base compensation. A compensation package is everything that goes into her surrogacy journey. So that will include monthly allowance for gas, parking, prenatal vitamins, those type of things. So that's going to be your smaller amounts, but that it does not get included in her base fee. Okay. And so her base compensation, it'll include like her maternity clothing. So all of the extras that come into it, that creates the entire package. And virtually every agency does this. So your base comp is one number, your entire compensation package is everything that would go to her for this journey. Okay. So I know.
So if we run the numbers,
and the reason I'm explaining that is for the third part of this explanation is that the legal contracts are written as such that she doesn't get any part of her base fee until it is confirmed that she's pregnant, because that's what the base fee is. It's for the pregnancy itself.
Right.
Okay. So if I'll just throw arbitrary numbers out there. So say she has her transfer June 1st. She gets her pregnancy test on the 10th. It's positive. About 2 weeks later, she's going to have confirmation of that pregnancy via fetal heartbeat. That then is considered confirmation. Okay. So then her first month of payment from that base compensation is going to start on August 1. That's the way 99% of legal contracts are written for surrogates. So if, let's say, sometime in August, unfortunately, she does not carry a viable pregnancy, she miscarries, then she has been paid for her month of pregnancy, but then the rest of her base compensation would just sit there in escrow.
Okay. I'm tracking. Okay. So I have a question. I have a few questions, but my first question is, how common is it in the United States to have any type of surrogacy insurance? And or do agencies even take insurance? I know, different companies, sometimes they just, flat out say, hey, it's, OOP only, so is that even a resource that someone could tap into if it was by chance part of their, insurance plan?
Yes. So virtually every agency I know, or certainly any ethical agency, is going to be absolutely certain that the surrogate has insurance. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's number one. Most agencies will review, I will use ours, we do the same thing. We will have their current insurance policy reviewed by an insurance specialist who works specifically in the field of surrogacy. So they know what to look for. They know whether to look for exclusionary language. They know whether to look for liens attached to a surrogacy journey. So we have it reviewed first. We'll get the report back. And in some cases, there's no exclusionary language. So we know that surrogacy will be covered. And in that case, if it's her insurance that she's already has, that's already part of their family's cost and everything like that, then what the intended parents would do is take over the copays and deductibles as they relate to the surrogacy journey. So of course, that's the ideal scenario for someone coming in. So it doesn't happen as much as we'd like. We'd love it to be everybody, but that's what we're looking for first. You might have that same situation, but an insurance company says, if you're doing a surrogacy, we're going to add this additional lien. And liens could be the full amount of somebody's compensation. So if a surrogate's getting, say, $50,000 for her base compensation, they'll say, well, we also want $50,000 to cover her insurance, which is outrageous. So we always have to look and see if there's any of that type of lien language in there. If there is lien language in there that is unbelievably expensive and it just doesn't make any financial sense to move forward with that insurance policy, then there is an option to take out a private insurance policy. There are, I believe it's 3, maybe 4 places in the US that do it at this point. And all agencies work with the same people. So we work with the same companies. So those private policies, usually on average, you're looking at $25,000 to $35,000 for the private policies. So certainly less than the $50,000, but nowhere near as inexpensive as if somebody had a policy that we could use, right?
Yeah.
Also, we're subject to the time of year. So if a surrogate doesn't have surrogacy-friendly insurance and we're in, May, and we can't review and look for another policy that covers insurance until, for a January 1st start, that's several months that we'd have to wait. So a lot of intended parents in those situations will opt to go ahead and just do the private insurance policy. If we're getting close to open enrollment, there are options called gap insurance plans where you can just pay a nominal fee to cover them from, say, October to January 1st, because we know, they're not somewhere in the transfer within that and the pregnancy, we're not going to have the birth until after January 1st. So much of it's depending on the time of year, the policy that she has, what the options are, and what the intended parents want. And I wish it was a just easy, here, do this or this, and this is what it costs.
It's never easy. Don't worry. We're used to that here. We're oh no.
And that's really the Cliff Notes version too. That's not even
very helpful. Yes, no, nothing in our world is easy, so we're used to complicated. And as we try to kind of wrap up in our conversation, because again, I could talk to you for the next hour about all the things that are popping up in my brain. But I want to know, I'm assuming at some point in time, there has to be a conversation about mental health and emotional health on the journey, right? For the surrogate, obviously, also for the intended parents. And as you mentioned, like most people do not arrive in this place not having been through hell and back, right? And a lot of people, this may not be their first choice, right? They had other plans and they saw life very differently.
Yeah.
Very rarely. And I think to that point though, or the sidebar, it's like this kind of myth about, surrogacy is for rich people and you're just choosing it because it's easy. It's like, well, everyone else who's not doing that, there are people every single day who are again looking for whatever it's going to take. So but do you all facilitate that type of therapy, for example? Do you have counselors on staff, or is it kind of up to the parties, kind of at your, I'm sure, guidance and I'm sure encouragement, but is it up to them to kind of find their own therapist to work with them, or is it kind of a joint conversation and Do they have sessions together? Do they, what is that kind of mental health support look like for both sides of the fence?
Yes, it's a really great and probably the most important question. Just a little side note, because it will help also your listeners, is I'm co-founder of the Society for Ethics in Egg Donation and Surrogacy, which is a national nonprofit that was created to create standards specifically for surrogacy agencies. So different than medical guidelines, which you're going to see from the ASRM, this is standards for agencies that include mental health standards. So if they wanted to go on seedsethics.org, the standards are right up front for this is how every agency should run, and every agency that's a member is on that website as well. And we created a standard specifically around mental health because of how unbelievably important it is on this journey. So for surrogates, they have to have a psychological evaluation and psychoeducation to even be accepted into a program. And every clinic that I work with requires it now. So you couldn't even match with one of their intended parents without that evaluation. Okay, so it's not just the MMPI and the testing, it's the psychoeducation, and it's a full report. So for intended parents, it's not a, pass or fail for the evaluation, the same as it is for a surrogate, but they do need to go in and have a psychoeducation that explains to them what this process is, what they should expect if they're getting, specific feelings that are very common to this journey, what not to put on the surrogate, right? Where to put those emotions, how to create that support system ahead of time so it doesn't go, to the wrong place during this journey. Then the two of them, once they match, have a meeting together with a mental health professional who will also go over a lot of the big feelings, the big questions, sometimes you get somebody that's so hands-on and wants to talk every day and all this kind of stuff. And then, there was someone else that is busy and private and prefers to have a scheduled time once a week to update them on everything, and really just making sure that everybody's expectations are really clear right at the beginning. Now, I will always say this because I've been doing this for 24 years now. Relationships always evolve. No matter what happens in that initial, meeting together with a mental health professional, once people get more comfortable with one another and excited, and a pregnancy gets to that point, especially the second trimester when people are far less stressed out, those relationships oftentimes evolve well past whatever they agreed to in that meeting. That's just sort of human nature, I would say. But jumping back, so for surrogates, we do ongoing mental health support. So every single month, we have group mental health support for surrogates in different stages of their process. So you have some surrogates that, love to share in those group meetings, some that just like to listen and not feel like they're alone with a lot of the feelings that come up. But it's a requirement of the process once they're matched. So they have to attend these monthly meetings. And we've had so many surrogates when, after birth and after, their 3-month postpartum, when, that the door is closed for those mental health meetings, are like, can I still go? Or, really, because they just, they get their surrogacy sisters and they feel a part of a group. So we get a lot of very positive feedback. That I'm aware of, I haven't had anyone say that they don't like those support meetings. Additionally, we have and I can't say everybody, but I think a lot of agencies are seeing the benefit of this more and more. We keep an emergency fund resource specifically for mental health if they need something a little bit more private. Okay, so we can't control certain things in life. We've had surrogates who, were in the middle of a pregnancy and their, partner came home and said they wanted a separation or a divorce, or a parent passes away, or, what I mean? Life happens. That's a really long time, really, when you think about it, from the time someone's matched to birth, can be a year and a half, 2 years even. And so things can happen. And if things like that do come up, we want to have those resources available immediately. So we just keep it there. It's not always used. It's not always needed, in which case it just goes back to the intended parents. But it's just an extra little cushion fund in case they need it. We can also use that to pull from that fund if there is some personality conflicts or clashes, or, both sides are coming from very different emotional spaces. Surrogates have been pregnant and given birth before, and it's gone very smoothly. Otherwise, they wouldn't be a surrogate. They wouldn't be approved, right? Intended parents are coming with PTSD, oftentimes trauma associated with this journey, so little control over anything. And with someone that is a stranger, really, right, when they're coming into this. So intended parents have a tendency to, have those panic attacks, or try to micromanage, or try to control. And you have someone that's like, I know what I'm doing. I've got this. And then you have this other side that's like, you ate McDonald's today, So it's like, you have these two things. So that fund can also be used to go back to the mental health professional that they had that original meeting with, and sit down again and talk through a lot of these, because communication is also half the battle. Surrogates just don't always understand where the intended parents are coming from, because they weren't ever in that space. And intended parents are just over here like spending so much money and like so little control. So I cannot emphasize enough, and our at least the ethics side of our industry, the ethics group, can't emphasize enough how important mental health support is. I wouldn't suggest anybody go through this process without those things already just put into place, knowing who you're going to, having that cushion fund for it, and just knowing that things are going to come up that you can't possibly predict.
Yeah, no, that's so important. And thank you for kind of diving into that. I think it's just a really important, very important piece to all of this. So if someone wants to reach out to your agency specifically, please give us all the information, website, social, all the good stuff, so they can find you in and reach out with questions.
Absolutely. And my consultations are completely free, and we will do them for as long as somebody wants. So we just want to make sure, whether they work with us or not, that they feel fully educated and safe going through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's your website?
Okay, www.allfamiliessurrogacy.com.
Awesome. And I know they can get all the other information from the website. Wendie, thank you so much. I could talk to you all night. But I'm excited because this is going to be coming out during Infertility Awareness Month in June. And so if there's someone out there, what is like one just like lasting little bit of information that you want to share with somebody who is still either just struggling on the journey, or looking for a next step during this very, very critical month throughout this year, what would you say to them in that moment?
That the process of going through infertility and assisted reproduction is definitely a practice in the art of perseverance. You have to dig deep, but if you want it bad enough, there are plenty of people here that are going to help you.
Yay. Well, thank you again so much for joining Fertility Ain't Fair. We have learned so much. I hope everyone had their notebooks ready. And again, there's so many other questions, but Wendie, I'm just grateful that you found yourself in this space. It was not by chance. It was clearly an ordained thing that was brought to you. Yes, absolutely. I believe in people guiding your steps in the right place. So thank you again for not only being a donor, which is already fantastic because you help someone increase their family, but thank you for saying yes to wanting to run an agency, and not just run it, but run it the right way. So thank you so much for joining our community. Now you're part of our space, and we love you. We appreciate you.
Brittany, and the love goes right back. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.